Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I'm your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with producers Richard Allen Jr. and Dr. David J. Fletcher. Richard Allen Jr. is the son of legendary Major League Baseball player Dick Allen and currently serves as the producer of the documentary My Father, Dick Allen. Growing up immersed in the world of professional baseball, Richard traveled alongside his father during his time with the Cardinals and Dodgers. With a background in business administration and 15 years at the prestigious Howley law firm, Richard blends operational expertise with a deep-rooted love for storytelling and legacy building. His passion through this documentary is personal and powerful to cement his father's rightful place in baseball history. Dr. David J. Fletcher is a physician, Army veteran, and nationally respected baseball historian. A 1972 graduate of Glenbard West High School, he grew up inspired by Dick Allen's impact on Chicago and the baseball game. In addition to running his medical practice, Safe Work, Illinois, Dr. Fletcher has been a champion of baseball justice, leading the fight to exonerate Buck Weaver from the Black Sox scandal and co-authoring Chili Dog MVP, a tribute to Dick Allen's transformative 1972 season with the White Sox. His tireless advocacy and storytelling continue today with My Father, Dick Allen, where he partners with Richard to ensure the world remembers the man behind the myth. Hello, Richard and David. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm excited.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. And I'm really excited today because today's a little extra special, not just because of the conversation, an amazing conversation we're going to have at that, but this is only the second time in show history that we have two amazing guests in one interview and get different perspectives and really dive into things. So I am super excited and grateful to have both of you on today. And to start off the show, can you tell me what success looks like to Richard Allen Jr. and then Dr. David J. Fletcher? Can you tell us your thoughts as well?
Okay, great. Yeah. So success to me, I'd have to say, success would be achieving a goal or something that you set out to do. Whether it's starting a business or getting your doctorate degree and having a target that you shoot for. And what it looks like, I'd have to say success looks like that feel of accomplishment, satisfaction, that calmness about yourself. I mean, I'm an Eagles fan, so for them to do what they did in the Super Bowl and seeing like images of Jalen Hurts with the cigar and everything like that, that's like, well done. I've completed it. That's what success looks like to me.
David, before you begin, I just gotta say, as someone who grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, 15 minutes from the stadium, I completely understand.
You get what I'm saying?
David, what does success mean and look like to you?
Well, I'm going to echo a lot of Richard's comments. I think it's for someone who maps out what their goals and strategies are to achieve, whether it be getting a particular degree or starting a business or writing a book, or in the case of Richard and I, working on a film project. And so I think it's when you map out what you want to achieve and you get it done, it's a great deal of satisfaction. And I think that is what really resonates with me with success, when you finally feel satisfied. You've lusted for this goal and it gets done. And, we're going to talk about that with this particular project, but that's kind of what success is to me.
And diving into this particular project, Richard and David, My Father, Dick Allen is more than just a baseball documentary. It's a story about legacy, justice, a son's mission to honor father. He changed the game in more ways than one. Can you take us back to the moment this project was born and what inspired both of you to come together and tell the story now, and what does it mean to each of you personally?
Well, let me lead off because I will tell you when I first started working on the story was back in the mid 2000s, in that I was working on this baseball museum project for Chicago. And part of the project, I felt it was important to honor Richard's father because he basically saved the White Sox from leaving the city of Chicago. And I was fascinated with him when I was a 17, 18-year-old, growing up. And he was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. And he had 3 great years in Chicago and saved the franchise. And he was gone. And he was like a meteor who streaked across the sky. And he never got his due for what he had done. And plus, also, I knew, even though he was the best offensive player of his era, was not in the Hall of Fame. And I knew all the reasons why he was not. So I was sort of, my genesis was back in the mid 2000s, and I attempted to contact his father. It took me a while to finally get contact with him. And what really put the project on fast forward was in 2011. There was the Veterans Committee ballot for the Hall of Fame, and his dad wasn't even on the ballot. And it was just a tragedy. There's a great story in the New York Times about that. Why not Dick Allen? And so that was sort of really pushed me. I've got to get this tribute to him arranged. And so I had his father have come back to Chicago. His 72 teammates come to Chicago 40 years after he was the MVP and saved the franchise from leaving Chicago. And that was sort of the impetus. And that's when I first met Richard. And I'm going to let him kind of take it from there, and I'll fill in some more blanks. So Richard and I met in 2012.
Yes, and that was a great event. My father actually got to enjoy it with both his brothers. We took a photo on. Actually, my son was there as well, so we all took a picture on the field. And secretly, I surprised him by bringing the MVP award, which was a picture that he kept behind his desk. He was so proud of that. Um, Recognizing that 72 team, again, going back after what Dr. Fletcher said, that it was a new friendship that he and I established, and he kept in touch and we kept going. I worked alongside Mark Carfagno as well. And it's like the two forces joined together and created one huge snowball. And I mean, it was to the point to where my father would say, "Can we call the dogs off?" And I'm going, "Dad, this thing it's about you, but now it's big. People are seeing what was overlooked for so long."
Yeah.
And
To
I
fill in
want
the blank, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
continue. No,
I
continue.
was going to fill in just the continuation of that. So we met in 2012. The tribute was great, and Dick got on the ballot in 2014, and he was still alive then. And we thought he was going to get enough votes to win. And Richard and I are out in San Diego for the election, and there was a last minute change substitution of one of the committee members, and I predicted that was going to be the reason why his father did not get elected. He lost by 1 vote, and Richard called his dad up and said, "Hey, we lost by a whisker," using horse racing terms. So that was devastating. So we fast forward. His father gets his number retired by the Phillies in 2020. He ends up dying of cancer in December of 2020, 4 months later. The Hall of Fame vote is postponed because of the pandemic. It's again in 2021 in Orlando. Richard and I are sitting next together like we were in San Diego in 2014, and he loses by a vote again, 1 vote. So we've had heartbreak after 10 years of efforts. He doesn't get in. So then fast forward to 2024, December, when success was achieved. He got 13 votes. I had predicted he would get 13 votes. And that was the impetus for the film, was basically telling the arc of the story.
And that being said, one thing, Richard, you brought up in your answer is that it started to obviously about Dick Allen and getting him into the Hall of Fame. And this, but it snowballed into so much more. What was that like for you, especially as the son of Dick Allen, watching this go from we have this goal, we're going to try to do this, to it taking on such a life of its own?
It was, I mean, the response where people, were telling me, I have to go back a second because they said to me, because he would talk to me, my father would talk to me about Hall of Fame. And it's like, I don't want anything to do with it. I did what I did. And I had people explaining to me in his era, he did this for 10 years straight. So it had me thinking, it's like, okay, they have a point. So more and more people were getting along, and they were telling me things that I never knew. I mean, I'm still always finding out new things. It's like, oh no, he did this and he did that. These numbers. But when more and more people would give me evidence of the things that he did, the little things, I like speaking with Goose Gossage, just little things like running the bases. Anyway, but to go back to that whole snowball effect, of the response for everyone to get together and say, here, this is an oversight that needs to be corrected. I mean, reporters as well. There was a lot of people that jumped on and wanted to expose what was wrong.
And David, for you, seeing it as a historian of baseball and then seeing that journey of people going, yeah, Dick Allen should be, let's have this conversation. As a historian and someone who's really wanted to see this come to where it is now, what has that been like for you to see the snowball build and build and build?
Been fascinating. I always believed he would eventually get in. I think that the efforts took a lot of national efforts. He talked about Frog from Philadelphia, who was sort of the Philadelphia connection of the project. I was the Chicago connection. I think just for me, seeing it happen as an historian, it was basically trying to right a historical wrong. He should have been inducted 40 years ago when he was alive to be able to enjoy it. That's the sad thing about it. He's not there to be able to see his plaque up on the wall. Richard got to go to Cooperstown last Friday to see where his dad's plaque's going to be. And that was really a special time for him. And we did that as part of the film that we got coming up. And so just it's righting a historical wrong. And I think it's also very important for me as a historian is this is a really great story akin to, this week was a Jackie Robinson Celebration Day on April 15th. Dick's story is very similar. Black Lives Matter story, what he faced, growing up, what Richard with his dad, with some of the fans would come to his house and dump garbage and all that stuff. And his dad was sent by the Phillies down to Little Rock, Arkansas. Back in 1963, he faced a cauldron of hate, incredible racism. What he overcame, it was such a great story, and a story about forgiveness. And the problem with Dick as a historian is he knew his worth. He became the highest paid baseball player in 1973 because he was worth it. But for a long time, people didn't see his value, and they thought he was a difficult teammate and all this other stuff. He played on 4 different teams in 4 different years, but he was the best offensive player for 11 years in baseball for what's called OPS plus. So seeing the statistics were there, it was the off the field aspects of his career that kept him out. And also, he wasn't very friendly to sports writers back in the 60s in Philadelphia, and that didn't help. And so, with the lens of history, people realize what he did on the field, but also he was very special off the field. He was beloved by his teammates.
And let me say, knowing Philly fans and writers, they're hard sometimes. They take on a mind of their own and they form their own opinions. And sometimes you got to work really hard to get back in their good graces. That being said, Richard, you brought up a point as well in what you were saying is that there's still so much you're learning by going through this experience, people sharing their stories and experiences with your father. What was like growing up as the son of such a powerful and, as David just said, record-breaking, amazing baseball player, and at times polarizing figure in baseball? You've had a front row seat to both the triumphs and the struggles your father faced on and off the field, and some that you're probably just learning about now or in recent years. What was it like to witness that as a child and then now as an adult? And how was your perspective shifted while working on the documentary to preserve and protect his legacy?
Well, for starters, growing up, I didn't know the difference. I mean, he was just my father. He was just dad around the house. I mean, going to the ballpark and traveling with the team was a norm. It was the norm for me, spring training and everything like that. Um, Polarizing, I did not see, it was when we would be shuffled through crowds and escorted and things, after the games and things like that. Again, I just thought it was a normal way of life for me. Now, it's completely different. I tried to play myself. I see the difference. I see everything that he went through again with Little Rock. Before he started to really decline and get sick, I had read an article, which was a very detailed article uh, from Jacob Goldfinger. I mean, detailed to what was going on in Little Rock at the time, down to the weather and the construction that was going on. And I finished reading it, and I went to my father and I said, I don't know how you did that, man. I really don't know how you did that. So again, as an adult, I see, the things that he stood up for, which I didn't think he was being too much of a rebel. He just like it wasn't a great time of his career to say, no, I don't want to be called Richie, when the whole Muhammad Ali changed the name Cassius Clay. So it's, uh, I praise him now, and I see how polarizing he was and how much of a difference he made in baseball. I tell people you can't talk baseball in the 70s without bringing his name up. So yeah, he was a polarizing figure. As an adult, I see that now, and I admire him for all that he stood up for.
And David, for you being a fan of Dick Allen's, did you see some of that when you were a younger fan versus as an adult? And how has learning about his experiences affected you?
Well, when I was a 17, 18-year-old, I was a fan that was mesmerized by him, and that he basically, we almost won the American League West that year, and if Bill Milton hadn't hurt his back, I believe, would have won the World Series, but we came close. So he revised the franchise and made it exciting to go to Comiskey Park. We had Nancy Faust, the organist, start walk-up music with Richard's dad, with Jesus Christ Superstar, which she's forever known for. So that was just a fun time in my life. I was starting college, trying to get into medical school. So I really didn't think about all the sociological aspects. It wasn't until I was much older. And then also in my own life, my daughter is a lawyer. In her first day of law school, she ended up meeting an African American student from Philadelphia who's been my son-in-law for 11 years. They have 3 kids, and so it became more of an issue for me understanding what it was like to be an African American. Now I have 3 African American grandchildren, and so I'm very sensitive about that issue. And then having that personal connection, I wanted to explore more. And obviously, got to know the story better when Dick came to Chicago in 2012, and I spent an incredible amount of time with him. The sad thing also most people don't know is that Richard's sister got murdered. Dick rarely talked about that, and that was another big aspect to hearing that. I've had 2 of my relatives who've been homicides, so I have a lot of personal experience I never want to share with that, having to testify at victim impact statements. in court. So I had that kind of experience, but I just learned the story better, and the story kept getting better, especially about Little Rock. And I was a big historian in the civil rights era and stuff like that. I was a big fan of Martin Luther King, and so that really sold me on that. And that experience for Dick was a central thing in his life, is because he grew up in Western Pennsylvania, which is relatively integrated, didn't have too much in the way of racial intolerance. And so he gets sent to Little Rock, and it's just a horrible experience. And he talked to me a lot about that. Before he died, Richard and I tried to get him to go with us to Little Rock. And in fact, we're going to go to Little Rock next Friday, and that Mr. Goldfinger, who wrote the great story, is going to be there as part of the film.
Well, I do have a follow-up, but I will say I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, so I'm 30, so that was 30 years ago. And I lived there for it first few years of my life. And one thing I will say, my favorite restaurant is called the Purple Cow. It's a burger spot. Definitely, and it's pretty historic in Arkansas. So I will say if you could go there, it is an experience. It's the old feel of a diner. There's purple, there's cows. Their milkshakes are the best milkshakes. Every time I go to the South, prior to COVID, they had expanded into Texas, and I was really sad when I went to Texas for my TED Talk, and they did not have any more purple cows in Texas. I was like, I just want to experience it. So if I could give you a recommendation on where to eat, that as a big food person, I would say that spot.
Well,
But
thank you.
that being, you're
Yeah.
welcome. And you also, in general, just have to tell me about the experience after the fact, because too, I think so many times in general, you remember a time, a place, experience, and it it can change so much over time. And so to go back and see what it was and what it is now can be so impactful in any place in life. We recently my boyfriend's a chief in the U.S. Coast Guard, and we recently got stationed in Juneau, Alaska. And we're here until 2026. And this was actually the very first place he was stationed out of boot camp. When we got here 12 years prior, we've been here a little bit. And so 12 years, and he has always loved Juneau and talked about it and this and that. And coming back as a chief 12 years later, it has very different experiences in rank and all these things. And there's places that are still here. There's things that have definitely changed, and we talk about that. And like when he shows me things, even from a place of just like global warming, the glaciers not being the same, the way people advocate for things. So it can be so interesting hearing stories and then being there and experiencing what it is like so many years later. So, David, I want to go back to something you said about the relationship you were able to build and the stories you were able to hear from Dick himself. What was it like building a relationship with Dick Allen, especially for you who had been such a fan of his for so long? And was there times when you heard stories that not only opened your eyes and made you see Dick in potentially a different way, but made you go, oh, wow, I would have never thought XYZ. It brings a different light to the person I always looked up to and was a fan of.
That's a great question. I mean, I obviously evolved from a fanboy perspective when I was in high school to an adult relationship, um, out of mutual respect, and I think that why he and I developed relationship was I was sincere. I was not trying to make money off him. I was trying to do something to genuinely honor him. And I brought him people in his life that meant a lot to him. Roland Heeman was a general manager, trade for him. Goose Gossage, who was in the Hall of Fame since 2008, was a rookie on that team. So all these people that meant to him, I brought back, and he got the recognition when he came back to Chicago. He was received as a rock star 40 years later. And so, but I got to see the man behind the mask, and that's what I enjoyed the most, the complex. I mean, he was a very complex man. He was a human being. We all have warts and strengths and stuff like this. And so I got, I think, a really good picture of that. And I enjoyed that he was very open and engaging with me. He was not one who, as Richard talked about, he wasn't campaigning for the Hall of Fame like a lot of our baseball players. He knew what he did on the field. And so I like that attitude that he didn't have to prove himself to anybody. I mean, it's sad. He should have been in the Hall of Fame, back in the early 1980s, and he's had to wait 40 years. And that's kind of our whole film, is that arc of the story, and we're giving the legacy. And it's a better story years later because we really truly explain his legacy in baseball history, but also his lessons in life, sticking up for your worth, how he dealt with racism, and how he was just a tremendous baseball player, but also he was a really smart baseball man. And the fact, I couldn't believe how much baseball intelligence he had. He could have been a manager. He had so much about strategy, about players. And so that was sort of the evolution for me. I got to see the full picture of somebody and to sort of, become a pseudo family member. Richard and I have, we had, close relationships since 2012. And it's been wonderful. And I'm just so happy that we're doing this film for Richard because my father died in 2023. He loved Dick. He got to meet Dick in 2012. And I know he'd be proud of what I'm doing for Dick. But I think it's just like a Father's Day story. We're going to release our trailer on Father's Day. And I'm so happy we're able to explain and give a lot more light to some of the shadows of Dick's life.
And that being said, for both of you, what has it been like forming this bond and relationship and, like you said, pseudo family member over taking time to tell Dick's story and his legacy and making sure that his legacy is demonstrated in the right way?
Well, I think I can answer that. I said how it's been. It's having Dr. Fletcher as a reference has been great. Um, Even during his sickness, he explained to me the details of his illness and what could have been done or what we should have done together. Um, Even down to the his services, his funeral services. He's just been a support to lean on um, during his sickness and afterwards.
Um, so that being said, I want to focus more on the documentary. And I know we've been talking about, but let's dive into it a little bit more. The documentary you guys are making touches on powerful themes. You have racial injustice, media bias, and the emotional weight of a legacy. Dick Allen wasn't just a ball player, he was a man navigating an era of deep societal tension, which we've kind of touched upon, while being misunderstood by much of the media. How did you approach unpacking these layered narratives, especially the tension between public perception and the private reality? And in telling his story, how did you balance the historical truth with the intimate, personal side of Dick's life, especially his role as a father?
Let me tackle that question because the documentary is still in progress. We still have some filming done, but to give you some light to those questions is obviously we tell the backstory and the racial injustice, and obviously next week's trip to Little Rock is going to be massive when Richard's going to be throwing out the first pitch along with Fergie Jenkins, who was a teammate of your hometown Little Rock in 1963. So that's an important part of the story. We're going to add a lot of color to it. But I think telling the story and the whole person, we recently did an interview in spring training at Scottsdale with Dusty Baker, who was not ever a teammate at Dick's, but they were close. In fact, he dated one of Richard's cousins for a while, so there's a unique connection. But Dusty talked about what other ball players thought of Dick, especially about contract negotiation. Dick had a lot to do with free agency in baseball. In fact, he was traded for Curt Flood, who had the famous antitrust case in the early 70s against baseball. So I think the documentary puts a lot of light on the backstory. It makes him human and how he dealt with stuff and the racism. But at the same time, we obviously have the theme of his impact on baseball and what a special player he was. And that was the genesis of me writing Chili Dog MVP, Dick Allen, the 1972 White Sox and the transformation of Chicago, with my co-author John Owens, who's also a producer in the film. Was we wanted to tell a story about a special year of this gentleman. He was the MVP, he was the best player in baseball. It was an incredible season. It was the last year the American League had pitchers, and that story had to be told. And what he did for Chicago. Harry Carey was the broadcaster for the White Sox. Nancy Faust again interviewed. Walk-up music. It was the third year in her career, and just a special package. And I wanted to tell that story, 1 year focus on that, because I thought that would really help us Hall of Fame chances if people knew not just the baseball story, but his impact on baseball in Chicago, a charter American League baseball team that he saved, and just how beloved he was by his teammates. And he overcame this image that he was a cancer on his team. I mean, he was a straw that served the drink. He brought the fans back in Chicago. I mean, the White Sox sucked in 2024. Well, they sucked in 1970. When Dick came on the scene in 1972, they almost won the division. And he brought, 1.3 million fans in the stands as opposed to 400,000 in 1970, and they're about to move to Milwaukee. So we're going to tell that story with the documentary.
I love it. And Richard, for you, what has it been like as well, telling that story and making sure that you get to unpack all of those different layers and touch upon them? Because I feel like each of those layers that I just discussed are such important topics, not only to discuss, but to then be able to portray, to give not just fans, historians, people who are passionate about learning and listening to other people's experiences, the full picture.
I agree. Yes, the full picture, that's the key takeaway. As Dr. Fletcher mentioned, it's a lot that he's been labeled with. And my father would never, he would say, as long as we know, he would never, he would say, the more you try to explain, or the more guilty you seem. So he just would let things go and let them go under the table. But I think what this film is about, well, for me, it's going to unfold who he really is, and for me, that means a lot because, as I mentioned, he wouldn't explain or take the time to say what really happened. I mean, jokingly around the house, he would, talk about certain things in his career, but he wouldn't. I brought up Little Rock uh, one time, and uh, over a phone call, and he hung up on me because I asked him. I said, "How about we just take a trip and just go see? You can show me around." And his response was, "That's like walking through the graveyard," and he hung the phone up on me. So there's a lot that I would like to know, obviously, and I would like the world to know.
And with that, with so many emotional layers, and that being an example of there's some things he just didn't want to necessarily talk about or had thoughts about, and the historical complexities. I imagine shaping this story into a documentary was both rewarding and challenging for both of you. What were some of the biggest decisions you had to make during the production process? And I know you're still in it, whether it's choosing what stories to highlight, what footage to include, or how to frame Dick Allen's legacy for new generations who may not know the full story. And Richard, I'll start with you, and then David, you could take it.
Okay. Well, I try to answer your question the best I can. For me, it's still kind of new, the direction we're going with the film. I think next week, Little Rock it's going to be big for me because, as I mentioned, I always wanted to see. I mean, I've heard bits and pieces of stories from my father himself and from the Jay Goldfinger. So with this film, next week I think it's going to be the eye opener for me. I can see more focus as to which direction that we're going. I know we're um, digging into some of the things in the past of who he was and who he was made out to be, but I think this part of the film is huge for me.
Well, the question about the things we wanted to include and make sure we featured, Little Rock was essential. We also are going to go back to Chicago. Richard's going to throw out the first pitch on May 3rd. They're going to do a bobblehead game for his dad. They're going to have a bobblehead of his iconic Sports Illustrated cover from 1972, Absent the Cigarette. And that's going to be a cool event to have him honored in Chicago. So that's going to be nice. And we're going to also go up to Wampum, where Dick is buried at and was born at. And that's going to be real critical to kind of tell his origin story. So we're also going to do some stuff in Philadelphia. And then obviously the climax is the Hall of Fame ceremony. Richards had the preview last week where he got a private tour, got to see everything, and really was, crystallized this as real. And so, those are the big stops that are left is, Little Rock, Wampum, Chicago, and then Cooperstown. And that's what we've got. We've got a few other interviews of people, but my production company, F. Ferguson Productions, is financing the film. I'm not taking any shortcuts for this. We have a fantastic crew with Sharon Panazzo as the executive producer, who used to be with the Cubs at NBC Entertainment. We've got Andy Bellman, who's done several great films, including Believe Land for ESPN, and then John Owens, my co-author for Chili Dog, who works for WLS ABC in Chicago. So we got a great team. We've got some great footage. It's going to be exciting, and we get to the Purple Cow. We're going to send a picture of Doobie and me. And one of the things as a Little Rock resident, you obviously know about the Little Rock Nine. When Dick was on the Travelers, he lived with one of the families of the Little Rock Nine. And to me, that's such an important tie into the story, how important that was.
And that being said, and David, I'll let you answer this first, and then we'll go to Richard. One thing Richard brought up is the emotional impact, going to Little Rock, a place he has been wanting to go before, now getting that experience in that. What is it like understanding the impact of these different places you're going to go and wanting to highlight in the movie? And how do you think it will be experiential wise? Like, are you preparing for some of the emotions or conversations that might come up when you go to these different places, or being able to hear the stories or walk the same roads, even though they might look different, that Dick Allen did go down?
Well, I think I'm open to what happens. I don't have a preconceived expectations. I mean, there are some interesting coincidences on the trip. The general manager of the Arkansas Travelers is a woman from Central Illinois, who I happen to take care of her mother for a work injury. So how small a world is that? So I'm looking forward to seeing the general manager Ozer for the Arkansas Travelers. But we're bringing Fergie Jenkins. He was Dick's teammate. He saw the racial injustice. He was an African American, well, he's Canadian African, and not American, but he was there. He witnessed how Dick's experience was. So having him there, but having the historian Jacob Goldfinger is going to be there, it's just going to be even make it more special. I mean, he's got a book coming out about Dick Allen and Little Rock that's coming out, and so we really feel we're having a great experience. And they're throwing out the first pitch. It's going to be a special thing for the Arkansas Travelers, and the Philadelphia Inquirer is sending out a team to cover it. So we really feel it's going to be a national story next week. So it's going to be fun. And the final comment I'll make is how exciting it is, personal for me, is my daughter Janine, who I said is married to an African-American attorney. Tyrone is coming on the trip, and she wanted to be with me to come to Little Rock. And so that's real special for me.
And Dave, Richard, what about you? And what do you think these experiences will be like for you?
Eye-opening more than, I mean, I on my trip to Cooperstown last week, I was giving a report that my father filled out after, I guess it was his rookie season in Elmira, New York, and it hit home to me because growing up, he told me the story about how he left at 18, and he went to Elmira, New York, hit a home run in his first minor league game, and he also told me he played against Tony Perez all his career in Elmira. In that report, the story that I heard for all those years was written there. So it's like I didn't know if my father was making jokes or whatever, but it was like confirmation. So now going forward to like next week, going to Little Rock and actually being on the field and hopefully meeting the owners that are still owners there. I mean, I love that type of history in baseball. So being on the field, throwing the first pitch, knowing that he played on that field, and his statement was, when I got there, I was the most hated, but when I left, I was the most, what was it, liked or appreciated. He won the fans over. I mean, from not wanting to get off the plane to being appreciated. So it's a special thing for me to go to experience that. I actually got to be on the field where he played in Williamsport, so that gave me a little goosebumps. So this one is a big one. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
And I have a few more questions. I know we're getting towards the end of time, but I want to cover them. So we're going to dive into this. So that being said, you've both brought up the fact that you're going to these different places, different areas of the country are recognizing, you bobblehead night, you're doing the first pitch, you're doing stuff in Philly. Well, for you, both of you, and Richard, you could start off. What is it like going through this, filming the documentary, having your father inducted into the Hall of Fame, which we will touch upon next, but then the country recognizing him, the baseball community recognizing him now and really highlighting him now during this time?
Well, I think even though it's been the 40 years, obviously for him to be here, it would be more thrilling. But I think the fact that it's actually coming out is a sigh of relief to me, because growing up, I was the talking board. He'd bounce stuff up off of me because I wouldn't say anything, but so this whole thing now is about letting the world get to know the uncovered truth.
I love that. And David, what about for you?
I think it's just the same feeling for me as a historian. I love to tell a story that is America's story, and the story of forgiveness, redemption, and that justice delayed is still justice, and that's kind of how it is.
Yep.
Sorry. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, David, continue.
I just way overdue. So he knows how hard I've worked on this. Been very personal, and it's rewarding. So, my whole family's coming to Cooperstown to be there to witness it. And your whole theme about success, we want to savor it, but at the same time, we want to tell a story for future generations about what happened in the 60s and the 70s and how you overcome all this hatred. And just like what he said about Little Rock, I mean, he had all the N-word epithets, all the stuff. It was horrible when he first got there, but he, did great success, so much success in September of 63. The Phillies brought him up to the major leagues, and I call that kind of his Juneteenth game. And that's the day the Phillies celebrated the retirement number was September 3rd. So just a lot of satisfaction. It's a great story. And Richard's been such a great spokesperson. He had a lot of disappointment. And I was there in San Diego in 2014. It was even more horrible in 2021 when we thought for sure he was going to get in. And so it just was joyous when we got the great news in Dallas, but to see the nation actually see the recognition is going to be a fantastic experience.
And before, I do want to quickly, because I know we only have not much time left, but I'm going to touch upon that. But beforehand, David, you were just getting emotional talking before this, and I want to highlight the power of that because I think sometimes when stories get told and we see something we deem has overlooked for so many years and the justice come and things happening and people recognizing it, it can be so powerful, but people sometimes can forget the humans it touches and the work and what you just said. So for you, when going through this, what has been your emotions with it?
Well, I had a lot of disappointment when we didn't get in, but the emotions have been very positive with success. But I think it's just to see it finally happen and get the recognition. And I'm so glad that Richard was willing to open up his personal feelings with doing the film. It was originally we're just focused maybe doing a documentary about his dad, and we really felt that what we can tell that story within the context about Richard honoring his father's legacy, which is a more powerful personal story. And I've obviously been beside Richard for that, and I was honored that I was with him and his cousin and his girlfriend and his son in Dallas when we got the announcement. And so, for me, it's forever etched because anybody who looks at the Hall of Fame announcement, I'm there. And so, just when I gets the whole thing when you really want to achieve something and you really believe in it, it's got to be emotional. You got to have passion, and that's kind of what I had. And so, it's not just a baseball story. It's a story about overcoming adversity and believing in yourself, trying to leave a legacy. What I really liked when I got to know Dick as a human being, not just as a baseball star I admired, was the humanness, and especially when he talked about his daughter Terry, but also talking about other incidents he had in his life. A lot of forgiveness. I mean, he really I didn't wear it on his sleeve, but he really displayed his Christian faith and values. And I think Little Rock really was a test for him. And his mother kept him there and said, "You got talents. You need to be there." And I think that's the story. And I know that's going to come out in our documentary.
That being said, Dick Allen's Hall of Fame induction is not just a personal victory, it's a historic moment that validates decades of perseverance, advocacy, and truth telling. What was it like for each of you to witness the long overdue recognition finally become a reality? And what do you hope this moment and this film will teach future generations about resilience, justice, and honoring those who paved the way, even when the world wasn't ready for their greatness? And Richard, why don't you take this first and then we'll hand it off to David.
Yeah, I don't think it's a personal thing. I think it's something, as you mentioned, for the following generations to see if those that have really continue to follow baseball. For me personally, it means a lot for my son, who's Richard Allen III, to know the truth about his grandfather. So he's never seen him play. He's heard things, but um, long overdue, big sigh of relief, or that look of success feeling, as we brought up. It's that relaxed job well done. Uh, yeah, it's for the future generations to see and know the truth about him. I mean, I had Stan Hochman, a Philadelphia writer. He actually approached me and he told me that he was wrong. He was one of the people that would write against my father. And He personally told me that he was wrong. So it makes me feel like all those people that would read the articles that were negative about my father, here one of the writers that wrote these things admits to me that he's wrong, but they still feel that way. So you have people for decades having a dislike for someone from a writer who admit to being wrong. And my father, like Dr. Fletcher said, forgiving, my father would say, I understand, they have to put food on their table. I'm not mad at them. So those kind of things to come out would be meaningful to me.
Well, I think to further emphasize the story, it's a story about forgiveness.
Mm.
And that's what it was. And we got to really celebrate when we were in Dallas. I mean, I felt really good about what we had done. I had to do some last minute lobbying behind the scenes with the voters. I felt comfortable we get 13 votes. We had a watch party. A lot of people said it was the best Hall of Fame announcement ceremony ever because we had the family there. We had the Philadelphia media, we had the Chicago media. After the nice news we got, Richard had a nice 20-minute press conference, got to really tell us feelings at the time. And so the rest of the night, I didn't smoke a cigar, but I really got to celebrate. And Dick and I have something in common. We both like Heineken's beer. And I had a couple of Heinekens, and I had one last night thinking about this interview. And that was for my way of honoring his father, and that, hey, we got it done. We still got a lot of work to do. And it's even after it's all done, I believe this documentary can be positive for future generations. How to overcome adversity, justice is the same thing I've done with the Buck Weaver project of trying to get forgiveness on that. I have this thing about baseball players who need somebody in their corner, and that's kind of what it is for me. I felt like we got it done, and it's going to be a lot of fun going to New York in July.
And as we wrap up, I'd love to hear from each of you. David, you could go first, and then Richard. What's one takeaway you hope viewers walk away after watching My Father, Dick Allen, whether it's about baseball, family, or the power of rewriting history with truth and heart? What message do you want to leave etched in their minds?
I think it's rewriting history, that one has to have the lens of time to truly analyze events. And that's kind of what I see is so important, that we wanted to paint a different picture of this man, what he meant to baseball, but what he has meant for future generations about the values that he had and his on the field success are really important things that I want to see in the documentary. And also the impact on the son, in that this has been a crusade. I've been his partner in crime, but this has been his passion. He worked at all the various places he talked to, and it's a wonderful story.
And Richard, what about for you?
My takeaway, I would have to say, I would like for people to know and to see that he was human. The things that he went through, he was human, and he had to do it on the highest level, and he did it on the highest level, above average, and still did it. So he had pretty broad shoulders. He succeeded, and yeah, just for people to know that he was just a regular guy, and that he liked being a regular guy. So that's what I want people to see. And then after seeing this story, even if people still feel the same way about him, but as long as they know, like he said, I'm good with that. Just like if you have a dislike for him even after this, that's fine, as long as the people know.
Well, thank you, Richard and David, for all of your insight today and taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for looking forward to this burger. I really am.
I am too. I'm going to have to look it up. So thank you, Olivia, and thank you for so much and getting a chance. And also, I know it's special. You had two guests at once, so thank you.
Of course, and a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation include: what are you doing to honor someone else? This is a challenge I would like all of us to take on. Is what are we doing today to honor someone else, whether it's in our community, whether it's in our family, what are we doing to honor those people that are making an impact in the space? It could be as simple as being in a meeting and saying, look, I see what this person is doing. I see this and I want to acknowledge it, as well as sometimes it's not for the recognition but because you want to. I know both Richard and David touched upon this. Dick never wanted or needed, I should say, the recognition for the hard work, the amazing things he did in the baseball space. He was doing it because he loved the game, because he wanted to do it, and he knew what the legacy he left was, and he didn't need recognition from anyone else. So when we're all going through things, I think we all need to take some time to go, do I really need the recognition? Or embrace Dick's philosophy of, I'm doing this because I want to, and I don't need others to tell me I'm good or great or achieved this. Their voices do not matter compared to mine in understanding the impact and legacy I live. As well as forgiveness is the power we can all hold tight. Another thing that I think David and Richard really expressed in today's conversation is Dick didn't blame anyone. He didn't decide. He gave forgiveness for those different experiences and let it be. And I think sometimes we have to understand what is in all of our toolboxes is the power of forgiveness. We just have to be open to using it. And lastly, sometimes you need the lens of time to understand the situation and have a different perspective on things. This was a great episode with our top-notch guests, Richard Allen Jr. and Dr. David J. Fletcher. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.